Week 4 is in the books, so that means we need to hit those waiver wires to find players that could add value to the back end of your rosters. Quick note, I'll be referencing rostership percentages in this video, and those are coming from roster data from 1,700 Dynasty leagues on MFL, basically a 50-50 split of one quarterback and Superflex, all with a minimum of 20-man rosters. So I'm not pulling these players out of nowhere, but it is possible that some or all of these guys are even rostered in your leagues already, perhaps even by you, but for the most part, there are hundreds of leagues out there where these guys are on waiver wires right now. First and foremost, I want to highlight a couple players that are highly rostered, but not 100% rostered that I think should be. And those are Kenny Pickett, specifically in Superflex leagues, Tyler Algier, Kyle Phillips, Nelson Aguilar, Hayden Hurst, and Daniel Bellinger. Again, all guys rostered in over 90% of Dynasty leagues, but not exactly 100%. So double check your wires and immediately add those guys if they are actually available. All right, opposite of last week, we actually have a lot of options this week, especially at the running back position because we got a few injuries that came in from this past week of football. So first up, we have Broncos running back Mike Boone, after it was confirmed on Monday afternoon that Javonte Williams suffered a torn ACL and is now done for the season. It is really sad, really unfortunate, but that's where we are right now. We know that the Broncos have been running a committee backfield all season long, even last season too, with Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. So I would imagine that a similar situation could occur with now Melvin Gordon and Mike Boone, especially since they both saw the same number of rush attempts this week, albeit only 3 each. However, Boone was way more explosive with those 3 carries, totaling 20 yards to Gordon's 8 yards. Plus, Boone caught his only target for 9 yards, while Gordon didn't even rein in his lone target. I'd imagine that the Broncos bring in somebody. I mean, they kind of have to just for depth at this point, but no matter who they bring in, my belief is that Boone is going to get the first crack at being the 1B with Gordon. Not to mention the ultimate upside of what if Melvin Gordon gets hurt now, and Boone could be the 1A in the Broncos backfield, or even maybe the 1 for like a week or so if that were to actually happen. I'm actually comfortable dropping a fair amount of fab on Mike Boone in like the 20 to 25% range just to have a piece of that Broncos backfield now for the remainder of the year. Next up, we have a little pat on the back for me for highlighting him before the season started, and a pat on the back to all of y'all out there who added him at that same point, because it seems like stashing Deon Jackson right now is going to pay off this week after Jonathan Taylor left the game with an ankle injury, to which he said he's unsure if he'll be able to play in week 5 against Denver on Thursday night. And if Jonathan Taylor were to actually miss the game, the only 2 running backs on the Colts active roster right now are Nyheim Hines and Deon Jackson. I'd imagine similar to the Mike Boone situation that they add somebody or they call up Philip Lindsay from the practice squad for depth for the game. But Jackson has been their RB3 all offseason, all training camp, all preseason, and up to this point. So I'd imagine that Deon Jackson is going to get the first crack at being the RB2 with Nyheim Hines and being that complementary piece. And I got the idea that some people have that Nyheim Hines is actually the handcuff here. And while I do agree that he benefits, he's not going to be the early down guy. He has 4 career games with double-digit carries in his entire career, and he wasn't even that great in those games with those carries. So I actually believe that by definition, Deon Jackson is actually the handcuff, as he is going to be the guy that is going to receive the early down work. And what I think we have here is like a Dearness Johnson situation. Remember last year when Nick Chubb missed a couple of games, we thought Kareem Hunt would get more work, but the Browns actually kept him in his same role and gave Dearness Johnson the Nick Chubb role. That's what I see here in Indy, where Hines maintains his role as the pass catching back, the 3rd down back, and then Deon Jackson gets the Jonathan Taylor role as the early downs guy. Now, obviously, Deon Jackson isn't Jonathan Taylor, but if Jackson sees 15 touches, he could be viable as a spot starter, especially if you're missing Jonathan Taylor or guys like DeAndre Swift, Elijah Mitchell, just lost Javonte Williams, just lost Cordero Patterson, and you don't have any good replacements for them. Deon Jackson could slot in as a spot starter in your flex spot if you really needed him to. If you want a little bit more convincing, the Colts also played Denver on Thursday night, who has been a team that really hasn't done all that well against the run so far this season. I mean, Rashad Penny went 12 for 60 and caught a couple passes against the Broncos in week 1. Dameon Pierce went 15 for 69 against them in week 2. Jeff Wilson, 12 for 73 in week 3. And this past week, the Broncos allowed Josh Jacobs to run for over 140 yards and score twice. So like I said, if Deon Jackson were to get 12 to 15 rush attempts, maybe catch a couple passes on Thursday night, he could be a flex option for you just based on that volume and the yardage that the Broncos defense have given up to opposing running backs. And then if you were to find the end zone like Josh Jacobs did, or even just score once, he could be a 14, 15, 16 point fantasy point guy for you as a spot starter right off the waivers. Now, the next pair of guys to grab are Falcons running backs Caleb Huntley and Damian Williams. And Cordarrelle Patterson was put on IR on Monday, meaning that he's out for a minimum of 4 games. And in his stead should go Tyler Algier, who I mentioned as an auto ad, if he's even still available. More than likely he's not, but if he is, you need to pick up Tyler Algier for at least this week because he's going to be the main starter. But Caleb Huntley is also interesting as the current RB2 in Atlanta, who actually matched Algier's 10 carries on Sunday, even scored a touchdown. But I'm not throwing anything significant at Huntley. He's more like a free pickup just to see if anybody actually noticed that he was on waivers. But what I would spend for is actually Damian Williams, even though that you might not necessarily have to, because Williams has been on IR for the past 3 weeks now with a rib injury, and he's for sure out at least this week in week 5 too. But after that, then he's eligible to return in week 6. And I actually think that Damian Williams could return as the starter with Cordarrelle Patterson out, as he was actually the intended guy to be their complement with Patterson before he got injured. But at worst, he's the RB2 behind Algier when he returns, which is still a valuable pickup, just a guy to have on your roster. But at best, you're talking about a guy who could be the 1A or even the 1 in the Atlanta Falcons offense and just be a really solid starter for you in fantasy. You might even be able to grab him cheaper this week too, since he's still on IR. People might be overlooking him just because of that reason. So if he's available, I'd grab him now and just throw a decent amount of fab just to be able to pick him up and see what you can get over the next month or so while Cordarrelle Patterson is out. Lastly, I want to move over to the wide receiver position and just highlight Josh Reynolds, who showcased again why he's just a very solid receiver for both the NFL and for fantasy after stepping up to the plate as the Lions wide receiver 1 this week without Amon-Ra St. Brown and without DJ Chark. If Reynolds is still available in your league, he's worth an addition to the back end of your receiver depth right now as a guy that has shown that he can be a legit fantasy starter when his opportunity path is clear. Now, St. Brown was actually unable to practice all week with an ankle injury that he suffered late in the week 3 game, which means that he could actually miss another game this week against New England. If he were to miss again, and even better, if DJ Chark were to also miss again, we just repeat the same situation. I'd be willing to flex Josh Reynolds straight from the waiver wire if you had to, which is why he needs to be added in every single Dynasty league out there if he's not already rostered. Of course, you're probably wondering who should you even drop to add these guys in the first place, and the answer, like I've said for basically the entire season, is just like back-end wide receivers that really aren't playing at all in their actual NFL games and have no real reason being on your roster, and that's Terrace Marshall and Laviska Shenault, both Panthers wide receivers, Paris Campbell, Will Fuller, DeAndre Carter, guys like that. And at the running back position, I'll also add in Trey Sermon, Kenny Nwangu, and Ty Chandler, Gio Bernard, Keyshawn Vaughn, Mike Davis. Some of y'all are still holding on to like Julius Chestnut for some reason. These are all guys rostered in over 40% of leagues that I would drop right now for guys like Deon Jackson, Mike Boone, and Damian Williams at that running back position specifically. And if you're looking for more moves to make after week 4 in either Dynasty or a redraft, I highly recommend checking out Justin's video right up here.